visite. Merci d'être là, c'est gentil.
Cool.
On va voir ce qu'on peut faire.
Bonsoir, messieurs, dames. Je m'appelle Stephen McAdams. Je suis co-dirige cette série Recherche en lumière avec Kit Soden, qui est un doctorant en composition ici. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Stephen McAdams, and I'm co-curating this series with Kit Soden, who's a composition student here at McGill. The series basically aims to bring alive the research that goes on at the Schulich School of Music by presenting different professors' work here, the research behind composition, as in this evening, also in science and technology and musicology and music theory, but also in performance as well, what goes on behind the scenes that give rise to the final product that ends up on scene. So it's a great pleasure to have our first composition professor in this series, Denys Bouliane, this evening. And I'll turn it over right away to Denys.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you. If you want, you could come a bit closer. I'm a little bit sick, so I don't speak very loud. There's also some score we might get to a bit later. There are 3 copies of 4 different scores. If you want to come closer, that might be easier for you, as you wish. Whenever I'm invited to talk in a research format, I'm always thinking, composers do some research. Hopefully, we also find certain things. So that'll be sort of a journey, the research and the finds. Whether I really found something or not, you decide. So the Anticostian saga is a cycle of work which I've been starting since 10, 12 years actually. And in order to get there, we'll have to go through some older music. We might or might not be able to go through everything which I prepare. But before that, we have to define the X-rated and in-rated concept. Those concepts came to my mind actually 1 or 2 years ago when I had to explain my musical path for the last 40 years. And they came quite handy. So don't be afraid. I didn't use those concepts composing 30 or 40 years ago, but in retrospect, they seem to be handy. They also provide a certain interesting perspective to my knowledge or to my taste upon which you can see music. So what is that exactly? So actually, X-rated music is everything which refers to something else in music. It goes outside. And in rated music that refers to itself. That's a simple thing. So what does it mean? Is X-rated music dirty, contaminated, dependent, obscene, shady, as opposed to clean, pure, autonomous, respectable? Is it diachronic as opposed to synchronic? Diachronic through time instead of in time? Is it multidimensional? Are we getting to the old debate of program music of the late 19th century and absolute music, Brahms and Wagner? So those concepts are quite interesting as they are. So that's the plan for today. I'm not sure we're going to get there, but we're going to look at music as a communication form. So going back to Saussure, Peirce, the first semiologists, and then risking a division of music in terms of its functional, its functions, closer to music perception with Nattier. We're going to check a little bit the concept of topics, which is extremely interesting in my case at least. We're going to go oral exploration cognition with Eero Talasti, Stephen McAdams, and to try to sum it up with Lasse Thoresen, the concept of music as heard. I want to present you some concepts which could help us to understand what extrinsic and intrinsic music might be. So we're going to look for certain pieces and drop them in our Dropbox in an X and see what comes out. We're going to look, if we have time, maybe Bach, you can choose Chopin, maybe we choose Bizet, maybe we choose Ligeti. We drop some music there and see what is their extrinsic or intrinsic content or value. So that's the idea. My own path, well, that's a very copious menu. I'm probably going to go, for those who do not know how I work, a little bit music which is 35, 40 years old, and trying to show you what the idea is. My concept is those are older works, 40 years old, 20 years old, 15 years old, 10 years old, 5 years old. And the way I realize that now in retrospect after 40 years, that My music from 40 years ago was very much X-rated. It seems that it has gained in in-rated, intrinsic value over the years. Then it got extrinsic very much again, and I got frightened. And I went back, and now with the Anticostian cycle, I think there's a merge of extrinsic and intrinsic. This is what appears to me as my path over the years. It's a little bit self-psychoanalysis, but that's what appears to me as the thing. Okay, now let's go. Music as communication. Does music mean anything? Well, sure enough, Stravinsky had a quick answer to that. He didn't believe music was capable of expressing anything. He even said in some of his Harvard lectures, people that have no idea what music means, they just like the sound of it, which I like that very much as an idea. But let's go a bit further. What if, let's still, despite Stravinsky, if music was to mean something, could it be understood as a system of signs? So that's the idea. So then what have we learned over the years, from the old dinosaurs, Saussure, Pierce, to the semiologists here, to music? Then there's a long list of works, a concept which have been developed and adapted over the last 40 years. So we need to go through that very briefly. So very simply, well, that's Mr. Saussure, and he developed the idea of a dual relationship. We got the signifier, that's a word, and the signified, that's a tree. In the case of music, you would have a perfect total cadence, and it would mean the end of a musical phrase. So that's a simple analogy. Pierce comes later and comes with a triadic relationship, which actually is a bit more subtle. You have the word three, but then you have the concept of the tree in your mind, and you'll see how much important it is in music. And of course, the real object, the tree, still exists. So if you go that way, the music would be the perfect total cadence. That would be the sign. That's the end of the phrase, we understand. And of course, the real object is the performance or the pure acoustical sound file. So that's quite easy to relate to music in those terms. Now, Pierce also gets to three types of relationships in terms of signs. And this is where extrinsic, intrinsic comes quite handy. First of all, there are indexes. Indexes are connected to the object. For example, if you see that thing, you will understand that's a death hazard, and the reality is that you can end up there if you're not careful. Icon functions with similarity. So if you see that icon of a bicycle, well, you can see any bicycle, and it could be granny on a bicycle, could be a Bixie, could be anything. So there's an analogy, so similarity. The third type of sign is a symbol. A symbol means that here, whatever that is. We have no idea what this means. So that means symbols are a habit, a norm, a convention. Those are symbols which have been developed, which are shared with a consensual convention. So that is quite interesting. You can put a bit more. If you see that here, you can interpret, well, maybe a vehicle was there, might be slippery. That would be the thing. If you see Mr. Horowitz, you could see the mocking Vladimir, which refers to the greatest pianist here. If you see the sign here is trespass, pass or not pass, I have to wait. And of course, it's a command, wait or cross. But this, for someone who's not from our culture, who's not learned that sign, might not be obvious. It's a convention. So that's okay. So let's see some indexes. Simple indexes would be something like that. That's a relation of inference, military signals, horn calls. That's very clear that when we see that, it's a very simple iconic thing. There's just no doubt about what it is. Index. If we have icons, icons are the basis for isomorphism. It's the same thing. So that means in music you might have imitation of a natural sound, bird sound. For example, in Bach aria, there's Peter's sobbing at the end of the St. Matthew's Passion. Many form of lamento. So the sobbing goes, ah. So there will be imitations which are based on a similarity. So, of course, you can have Tweety birds, you can have rain, all sort of sounds. Messiaen did that, many composers did that also. You can also have symbols, which are more abstract, which are convection. So the whole musical language is based on symbols. We'll see a bit further how it functions. So basically, you can have a working definition of music Music is a type of, if you want to consider it that way, a communication form, which is sonic, nonverbal, interhuman. Well, we might be able to communicate music with dolphin at some point, but at this time, it's safer to say human, but we might extend it to cyborgs and a bit later. But of course, the aspect of cognition are it can carry meaning at the emotional level, gestural, tactile, kinetic, spatial, and prosodic. So those are concepts which are close to us, to music. Now, close to music perception, we have the famous tripartitional conception of musical fact, which from Molino and Nati. Basically, the poetic level is the concept of the artist, the composer in our case, the strategies, the methodology, the language. The neutral level is the score, which has to be performed to become sonorous, and the aesthetic level, the level of perception. So that's quite interesting. Let's compare 3 different pieces. If you take Steve Reich clapping music, you know all that, there is the intention to define music to its simplest common denominator. You either clap together or not together. You're in phase or not in phase. So the music does that, the score prescribes that, and the aesthetic level is that. It's 1 to 1 to 1. If you look at Fernie-House time capsule, the compositional strategies are completely undecipherable. That means they are there, but the trace leads us to something else than the strategies. So it's cryptic. Something in between would be Berg's Wozzeck. For example, we know that Berg has based Wozzeck on all the suite form, sonata forms, which are not audible per se. They are the support for the drama. So one could very well say, we don't really hear them, but had he not been there, Berg would not have been able to express himself. So that's a very interesting way of looking at things. So if we go a bit further, we come with the concept of denotation and connotation. This will all be useful a bit later. So that means if you have, let's say, a thunder, well, the word thunder, it denotates the noise accompanying lightning. It's very clear. And it connotates humidity, rain, and danger. So the meaning of the term in common usage. So that's something interesting there also. Now we need to touch a little bit. Ratner, in his book, Classic Music Expression Form and Style, talks of topics. This is extremely interesting to define music. Topics are coded style types. They are very much enrated. There's a syntax, a grammar which is defined as syntax, and laws of form. And it all makes sense. We can define dance types, marches, church idiom, pastoral fantasia, heavy metal, holidays evergreen, post-war, minimalist, British, neo-tonal, all sorts of topics which you would recognize because they're well defined, of course, if you listen to them. So, of course, they can crisscross in musical allusions. So they can become X-rated. That means if within a piece you allude to other topics, you are going extrovert. So you're departing your topics and you go to another one. That's quite interesting. Also another concept by Tarasti, isotopies. Isotopy, this is the principle of semantic categories who are based on redundancy. That means if you want to understand, let's take the classical style, many elements are repeated, they are isotopic. And the fact that they're repeated, they become a cognitive value. So if you learn something, if you repeat something, if you recall something, if it's played back again, then your memory will start to make association and links. And eventually, they provide criteria for syntax formation and structure segmentation. So we get to our friend Stephen here. I think one of the most interesting sentence I've read in the 80s were for Stephen. You might know that or not. We didn't know each other back then, but we got together at the end of the 80s. Something interesting. It seemed that there is some confusion in the 20th century between stepping out of a conceptual grammar, and I add syntax to that, and creating a set of arbitrary rules of composition and think out of these. While the composer may think this creates tension, it presumes the listener feels the method in order to be able to experience a departure from its relation or expectation. The idea is simply that at the poetic level, if the act of composition has to be perceived, you have to either use a topic, a syntax which is well known, or create your own and make sure that it is you can decipher it. So that's a big challenge for composers, because you can generate notes, you can break your rules, but if the rules are not understood, or if the grammar and syntax is not clearly set in a new piece, you might do what you want after that, but it's very difficult to presume that the listener might follow your act of liberty as a composer. So those are very interesting concepts to think about. So if we go a bit further here, we're going to go to Torreson. Now this becomes, that's the main thing. So Torreson sort of encompasses everything. I added a few things. So he's working with indexical signs. They are X-rater, iconic signs. Metonymic signs, he segments symbol into metonymic signs and arbitrary signs. Let's try to define that very, very simply. So indexical sign refers to the continuity. Remember the index of the tires we shine in the snow? So we infer that there was a car there or it was slippery. So we can have that in music, quivering voice. If you have a voice which is quivering, it might infer nervousness. You can imitate sighs, cries, breathing, heartbeat. Acousmatic music is very big on that. The concept of source bounding with Smalley. That means when you do acoustic music, if you have a door with slams, are we supposed to infer that the door is slamming or just concentrate of the sound of the door slamming? So that's a big discussion in the 50s and 60s and still nowadays. The iconic sign might be anaphones, which are developed by the concept by Philip Platt. For example, sonic anaphone might be Schubert's babbling brooks in all the Lieder. You can have the Baroque opera thunder. You can have also the kinetic anaphone gallop marches, tactile anaphones. So those are they have a similarity. You compare that, they have a resemblance to what they refer to. Then we get to metonymic sign, or synecdoche, which is quite interesting. So that's a set of musical structure that refer to another, it alludes to. For example, if you look at the Rithouse scene of Wozzeck after he killed Mary, so he goes and he tries to drink his sorrow away, and there's an upright piano, and there's a beer barrel music, pam, pa, ta, 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 it's out of tune. Of course, it's not real beer barrel music, but within the language of Berg, it sounds like such. So that's quite interesting. So that's a metonymic sign. It's not the real thing, but it's enough, it touches the topic of the real thing enough, and it creates it in his own language. It still remains Berg, but it's not just mainstream Berg, if you want. There's a lot of that in Berg, and a lot of that music in general. So the arbitrary signs would be recognition. So that means all sets of grammatical lists, rules, combination rules that support the establishment of musical language. So topics and isotopies come. This is more blue here. This is something which refers to itself. This is things which refer outside of music, or even outside of music in the visual world or in any type of world. And more here, you get to things which are more within itself, music that refers to itself. So many examples of that. The question is Mr. Torreson X-rated or not? We're going to debate that today. So that's a good example here. You remember the cuckoo song at the end of the second movement of Beethoven's Pastoral. The flute, supposed to be the nightingale. Now the quail, the cuckoo. So very clearly, that's, and Beethoven quotes it in his score. So there's a signifier, there's a falling minor third, actually it's a major third. Per comparison, there's a sonic anaphone, which we identify as a cuckoo song. We associate it per metonymic sign to spring. And one step further, we associate it to nature. And then we infer in a technical sign that it might tell us something about Beethoven's supposed inner emotional spiritual state. That's a chain of interpretant. This is quite fabulous. This all goes in our mind when we listen to that. So, interesting. So, things can get more complicated. Whenever you get into semiosis, it's endless. An interpretant can become another one, another one, another one. This is a little bit what happened with that seemingly simple cuckoo thing of Beethoven. So, we're going to go X-rated, in-rated. If you go to Jacobson, we're going to go very, very fast on that now. X-rated is extroversives in music, extra-generic musical meanings. In-rated, introversives in music, congeneric musical meaning. So we're going to go fast on that. That's a bit too much. So for the moment, we're going to look for music's intrinsic and intrinsic qualities in selected pieces. I selected a few. What have we learned until now? Well, we've got some signs. We got indexical signs. We got iconic signs. We got, they refer out, they're red. Metonymic signs, they're in between. The synecdoche is between blue and red, and the symbol is very clearly blue. We also have object referent, the concept. We also have different type of meaning. We have topics, which are chordal styles, and isotopies. We also have the mental model, mental scheme from cognition, which we didn't have time to go to. But the mental scheme is very simple. It's something which you, through repetition, which you consider as a mental object. It's stored, if it's repeated once, twice in your short-term buffer, then it goes into your middle-term buffer, and then you listen to classical style of your life, you go to your long-term buffer. So those mental schemes are extremely important to understand music as a communication act. So let's try to apply some of those concepts to some pieces and see if they make sense. So we're going to drop any music there, and see their content. Okay, that's a Bach cello suite. That's the first one in G, the jig. Okay, that's fine. So what do we have? I'm dropping that jig here in my box. So right away we got the metonymic sign, a synecdoche. There's a chord dance in triple meter. This is one of several standard types. It refers to the Giga type 2. Well, there are many types. This, the articulation, that's the chord dance in triple meter. There are different types. There's also the French type, whichever. But there's also an iconic sign. It's a form of kinetic anaphore. The way the cello articulates the piece suggests an imitation of dance bodily movement, very clearly. We also have indexical sign. The structural isotopies of the Baroque language might refer to the questioning of the value system of the Baroque era. So if you know, the Baroque is defined very often as something which is unordered, messy, but Bach brings a lot of order in the Baroque era. So that might be the structural isotopies of Bach's cello suite and many other pieces of Bach might refer to a form of order which the way he saw the world. He saw the world in that form. So that's quite interesting. So in that way, he departs very much from the definition of Jean-Jacques Rousseau of Baroque music. That's quite interesting. So we can go further there, any type of thing. Yeah. In terms of in-rated, well, you will understand that this part of logique, in terms of arbitrary sign, could, it has to be performed in the context of the suite. We actually experience a spatial temporal contiguity. So we understand the jig because we have four other movements, which are minuet, courante, and sarabande. And of course, we understand them because we compare it to all the suite of Bach's and all the other suites of it. So the topics go, and we compare the topics, that how we can understand what Bach's style is. Quite interesting. So this is in-rated from that perspective. So, okay, I'll pass the dances here. So again, we have the Kuckuck music, which I'm not going to play again. The iconic sign, well, there's a sonic anaphone, a very clear, even if simplified imitation of the cuckoo. So we associate Beethoven reference to birds and spring to nature, and then we infer. So there's a change of interpretation there, which is quite peculiar. So if we go further here, let's look at the Chopin Mazurka, one of many, with my favorite pianist. Sorry to have to cut there. So what happens in that case? Very clearly, the mazurka is a Polish mazurek. It's a Polish whole dance, that's very clearly. The origin, there are two types, the oberek, the fast form, the slow form, the kujawak. It's all based on this dance rhythm. So what happens? There's a sublimation process there from a folk dance to a court dance. The history of the mazurka is that way, and it becomes an art form. There's a lot of kinetic anaphones. For example, one could consider Chopin art of ornamentation as a way to create the melodic lines of the piano to suggest human voice, to make forget that the piano is a percussive instrument. So the way of ornamentating is to suggest, to imitate the voice. So that's quite interesting. So a lot of indicative signs, we can go further and further there. We can also infer about Chopin's inner nature, motivations, love of Polish people, distress, when you consider that Poland was partitioned 3 times by Russia, Prussia, and Austria. So there's a lot which can be understood from that perspective. So I'm going to pass the original mazurka here. We also have symbol isotopies here. There's a use of simple large forms, ABA, use of harmonic contrast, local and structural, use of a consistent fabric favoring one ornamented singing line over accompaniment patterns, even if the global texture, of course, is a bit more refined. Actually, Chopin is very often 4 voices. So, but the overall aspect is a melody accompaniment. So we can go. Let's look at Brahms' Orient dance for Leroy. So the orchestration especially. So what happens here? We have several types of dance. We have the Verbunco, the Czardas, and all that has been studied in detail, and we know very well that what Brahms did, this is the original dance, that's what Brahms did out of it. The first use of al Ungherese is by Haydn, the end of the 18th century, and there's a lot of references in different types. So there's the Verbuncos here, so that's typical Verbunco's ending. The Czardas also is very present in Brahms, and so is also Gypsy music, the cimbalom. There's a lot of imitation of the role of the cimbalom in Brahms, so there's very, very clear things here. So what actually happens in terms of orchestration? Brahms actually uses, let's see if I can find that here. I might be able to do that. Yeah. If you look at the dance here, the way it's orchestrated is actually more peasant-like than the piano version. If you want to play, the main melody is done on the G string, of course, by first and second violin. Open string. What Brahms does, he uses pitch-centered lowering technique, so he doubles with the bassoon. So the whole thing is going to sound much more peasant-like. That's the bassoon which comes. And then if you put them two together, it sounds like it's lower. Now, in terms of dance, Brahms is also using the possibility of the orchestra to do that. So this swinging music here is much more interesting than the... So the cello part and double bass together really swings a lot, which you could not do on the piano. So if you listen to that version here, that's quite interesting how it sounds. So this is one of many, many examples you could find in Brahms. Let's go a bit further here. So let's take Carmen, for example. Okay, so you will remember that beautiful Près des Remparts air. Etc. Okay, what happens outside of the exotic subject, the location, the hyper-emotional plot, and general flair, of course, which from Prosper Mérimée novel, what exactly is panish in Bizet music? So that's quite interesting. What we discover, that's the first time, we're talking of 1875, a syncretic fusion of Central European mid-19th century musical tonal grammar and syntax, a well-known topic, with southern Spain traditional musical modality and inflections which all come from Northern Africa, Moresque influence. So what would happen if we were going to take the Spanish out of Bizet? Would that make sense? So this is what we have here. That's the piano reduction, And that's the analysis of Bizet. And here, the third and fourth one, that's a simplified version. So what is fabulous here, you realize that at the beginning, we have, that's Bizet. And then we go, it gets modal. So we got something Ionian, C, but we have the chromatic ascending and descending together. But now we go modal in Phrygian. So that's quite wonderful. If we want to simplify that, a lesser composer would have come up with something like that. I made a tonal version just for the fun of it. So you would do. And then it's much less interesting, you'll admit. And I can play you a little bit of that one here, tonalize. It loses all the flavor. It's Phrygian, Lydian, it has many different modes. That's a complete syncretic version which Bizet did. So let's play that tonal version. I need a little bit more volume because it's too weak here. If you can give me a hand, I can lower it from here, it's too loud, okay? So let's see what happens. Thank you. Whoa, 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 whoa. They're two playing together. That shouldn't be that. So let's go again. So let's follow the lower one. Thank you. Now, that would be Schumann. Okay, you'll admit that it's considerably less interesting. Let's check for a moment, and you can see the analysis, what actually Bizet did, which is considerably more interesting, no doubt. Then we go to the modal progression. Wow, a bit louder. Now Phrygian, and we modulate to C. Now we go Ionian, and Lydian now with the F sharp. Aeolian. I'll stop there. This is absolutely fabulous. You can take out the Spanish, the modal quality, and see how poorer it becomes. So let's go a bit further with that. So obviously, we have that. We could go at Mahler. We won't have much time here. I'm going to pass this one. It's a very interesting one, though, but Thiele and Spiegel is an interesting one. So we have here the two main themes, the famous horn call, pa, 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 which everyone knows, of course. And of course, the famous clarinet twist, which is actually Thiele sticking his tongue. Sorry, whoops, I've got the wrong thing here. Okay, there are two things happening here. There is the twist, and of course, this is the Tristan chord, which is a parody of the chord, because the chord itself, well, there's no such thing like a Tristan chord in the first place, but we got that here. Normally, it should be done, but he simply does. So it simplified the whole thing. So I'm not sure Richard would have been very happy with that. So there's a lot of metonymic associations there. So the whole piece is full of that. also the topic of the whole 18th century rondo. So it really suggests all sort of things, which all sort of pointers to Till the Jester. And it goes back to a very old tradition from the 16th century. And the rondeau form is also an old tradition. So they're all sort of very interesting here. Let's have a quick look at Ligeti Etude 4 from book 1. So just to give you an idea. Okay, I'm just going to stop there for the moment. So let's throw that in. What do we have here? We got Central European mid-19 musical tonal grammar and syntax, and especially the topic of the so-called Schumann intimacy with the floating émiole. So what is very interesting there is that piece. If you look at that, it's very, very, very close. And I know very well that was the model because it was on Ligeti's desk when he was composing. I was there. So, and he didn't hide that. So the idea of émiole is very interesting. You got in 3 here very clearly. Sorry, in 2. And always in 3. So you combine the 2 together, it's a wonderful thing. This is exactly what Ligeti does. But that's not all. There's more, actually. There's also type of bop jazz harmonies and progressions, which recalls Bill Evans. There's also the advanced polytonality bordering full chromaticism, which is more Ligeti, and the generalized émiole technique in superposed tempi layers. So from illusions, we come to full syncretism, and that's the topic art form of Ligeti. If you look a little bit further, you'll understand that the harmony here of actually Herbie Mann in that case is very close to, sorry. Etc. If you look at the chordal structure of Ligeti Etude, we are in a very similar work. And so on. It's really based on that. Of course, it's depart from that. But this is an integration of a fantastic way, which you find in that music. So, well, let's talk of Steve Reich. We have something, I'm not going to play that here, maybe just visually show you. It's important to see, and you'll understand why. That's Ensemble Moderne, and Steve Reich is playing. Okay, it's terrible to have to cut, but let's look at what's going on here. There's a syncretic fusion of Central African Akadinda music. Want to see that? See them? This is original Akadinda music from Uganda. You get that here? Second players need to come in between. This is where Steve Reich learned it. And you have an inherent pattern. No one plays the whole thing, but the result is collective. This is exactly what happened in Steve Reich. There's also, to make it simple, that the jazz alluding modern consonant harmonies with static progressions, the constant pulse typical of pop music. There's also the slow transforming pattern, which is trance-inducing. The monotextual music avoiding hierarchical layering. So, okay, more important than that, the indexical signs and the metonymic signs transform into symbol. This is a new form of music making that represents the musicalized idea of the commute as a way of life. This might explain why this very strong sociological musical link, the success it had. Music arises as a collective process. There's a strong reconnection with the social function as we see in Central African tribes. There's no hierarchical, there's no solo, no main voice. No one is a soloist. Everyone partake. There's no hierarchical level of layering. There are inherent patterns which appear from the collective work of everyone. This is why this music is so important. It's such a huge success because it embodied what the hippie generation of the 60s, 70s mirrored themselves completely in that. So if you look at that from the iconic, eidectical, and the syncretic aspect, this sheds a lot of light on this music and why it becomes so popular. We could go on and on with that for a long time. So, oh my God, time is going very, very fast here. So I'm going to go a bit further here and try to go a little bit in my music for the time left, which is not going to be a lot. But let's see. Let's see if we can still make sense of that. So that would be that here. Okay. So in 40 years ago, at the age of most students here, I came up with the idea of writing a piece, writing music, which is completely extroverted, which refers to all sorts of things. Not for the simple fun of referring to things, because I was a lost person, a DP person, a displaced person, and I think I still am, even if I'm in Canada, after 40 years, simply that I could not readily associate with any specific topic, whether it was post-surrealism, whether it was minimalism, whether it was the music of Griset and Muraille, spectralism, which I knew very well. I'm one of the first who wrote articles on their music. So I realized that it was not me, and actually that my persona was more a seeking person, a questioning person. So what I tried to do is to bring music to the simplest common denominator, analyze the structure, and see if with some manipulation I could not recreate something per allusions. Basically, when you listen to my music of the 80s, you're listening to me listening to other music. So it's a bit strange, but that's how it's done. There are three pieces which are very much X-rated. So if we want to check how this is done, we have to approach that here. So I decided, is there a simple way to penetrate the structure of the tonal system, and not write a tonal music, but distort it with a very simple way. So I'm worked out with the zero mode, which is the scale of C. The beauty of that Locrian scale is that it's asymmetrical. It has two semitones. This is what makes possible to generate functions and to have aggregatical stresses and functional stresses. What if you were going to keep that? I have to check that. Sorry, maybe I can read from here. It's just very small. So, what if you're going to stretch your octave? Then you try to keep as much as possible the end tetrachord and the beginning tetrachord. Now you have to make a compromise here between the E. So you end up doing, and etc. It takes 12 times to rotate. You can do the same thing if you compress your octave. Tell me. So if you play it fast enough, it will create the illusion of functionality, but it's not. If you compress it to the maximum, you get to the compressed octave where all the intervals are crammed into a fifth. So you get something chromatic. So it's a simple thing, but it already borders on illusion. If you play that very fast, I'm going to play you the zero. I need more volume again, please. Yep. Okay, that's C major scale. I'm going to do the +1. See if you make a difference. It's very noticeable. Actually, we buy it. Let's play the -2 scale, and you'll see it still makes sense even if this time is compressed in a -7. So that means there's enough remaining functionality. If I play you that on the piano, something like that. So, what topics come to mind? Marie-Lou, you should know. What does it refer to? Keith Jarrett? Cecil Taylor? This is very much the topic it alludes to. Would you believe me if I were to tell you that every single note is from John Sebastian Bach? It's just distorted through those modes, very simply. So I'm going to show you in a simple fashion. So, okay, let's try to find that here. So let's see if I can find that. Yeah. Okay, you got it here. So, if you take a Bach chorale and very systematically remap it in +1 and all the other modes, automatically the functions are distorted and it refers to another topic. And the topics are very identifiable, if you allow me to say so. If you play just the Bach chorale, sorry. Etc. If you project that in +1, your chord becomes. So you end up with. You're very close to the world of Stravinsky. If you go into -5, and then you'll just recall what you just played. So that was our thing. That's exactly that. This was all the exact voicing of Bach. The rhythm has been changed because I projected Scott Joplin rhythmic topic on it. So you see, you can take something, and what I was interested in is to find a lever so I could go in that direction, more or less distorted, more or less metrical, more or less rhythmic, and so on. So I work with many, many different pieces with that system. And of course, there are different results. One, for example, might be, let's see if I have the score here. Yes, I might be able to find. Oh, shoot. Yeah. That's a piano concerto I wrote back then, long time ago. And that's all based on those transformations of the Bach chorale. There's not a single note of mine, if you want, but it all works there. So we can see it possibly better if I take this analysis. I hope we can find it. I think so. Yeah, this is the analog version. We're in -5, we're in -4, -3, and it goes on in a different fashion. So the idea is that it's not the notes which interested me. It seemed that every distortion seemed to refer to a topic. You would have composed with that, you have composed something different. But what you're listening is me making associations with the technical distortion, and then I just go for it. So that's a way of composing which was very typical, and that solved my problem of identity because I was a chameleon. I didn't need to have an identity. So if you listen to that, we'll be able to maybe listen to that one very briefly. Can we find that here? Yeah. Working? I got no sound. What's going on? Okay, let me see. This always happens when you don't need it. How come I have no sounds? There's nothing coming your way?
No, nothing your side.
And here? Okay, sorry. Terribly sorry, what's happening? The audio system is blocked. I'll try it again, just a second. It's terrible. Let's see if I'm more lucky now. Reloading. Simply won't play. Okay, so we're caught. We're really caught here. Okay, so we don't have enough time anyhow, but I'm going to go a little bit further in that system here. So we discussed extrovertive associations. I had a strong link with literature back then, with music of the literature of the magical realism. Basically, the terms come from Carpentier, a South American author, but is better known through the work of Garcia Marquez. The typical example of magical realism is 100 Years of Solitude. Basically, it's a story. All magic realists are storytellers. I am also a storyteller through music. And actually, they tell you a story which starts in a very simple fashion. In the case of many South American writers, those are gaucho stories. And in the case of the 100 Years of Solitude is the history about over 150 years, the family Buendia. They start from the first generation, second, third. They all carry the same name, so it's a bit of a labyrinth. You get really lost after a little while. And what happens is that from generation to generation, certain magical thing starts to happen. It's like Garcia Marquez with a syringe is injecting a little bit of fantasy or irreal, surreal. One Buendia doesn't need to sleep anymore. The other one is immune to bullets. Another one can fly, and so on and so on. But it's very believable because it's done very gradually. So you depart from the topic of the gaucho story, and you go into something magical. So this is what very much I've been trying to do. To make a long story short here, Borges also has been someone who actually invents worlds in his metafictional stories, if you want. He refers to a world which he invents himself. He quotes encyclopedias, but he makes the encyclopedias complete themselves. He makes them themselves. So to suit his needs, he invents worlds which are parallel to a certain reality. So very, very interestingly, Delvaux is a good example in the visual arts of what you can see, and especially this one, Magritte also. So at first sight, it doesn't look very complicated, but we have night and day at the same time. So there's fuzzy logic behind all that. So this is the evolution of the syntax in the language, which I worked on. I showed you a little bit that here. We're going to go very fast on that. Then I go a bit further with Comme un silène entrouvert, where the structure gets much more complicated. So let's see if it gets a bit more intrinsic. If I can, I don't know what the audio, why it doesn't work here. I'm going to try to find another way to open that. Okay, I'm getting sound. Okay, another program is working. So I'm going to show you that very, very simply, give you just an idea of what happens here. So the principle is that we are this time using a hybrid music, which is very much bebop. It's actually bebop articulation, truly. And the piece is built, there are 4 trios, 2 real and 2 virtual. So there's a lot of icons and indexes. The 2 synthetic trio also use delay machines, and even the real instrument sounds like delay. So it's old-fashioned technology. And they merge, they slide in pitch, and they come to a point where it's so thick texturally, so thick contrapuntivally that becomes a texture. So we go from counterpoint to texture. And that's the first canon in music history which includes change of speed. Nancaro, of course, did that, but it's done with live musicians. So that goes that way. I'll play you a little bit, just a little bit of that, so to have an idea of, and through the whole process, the music is going to line up and line up and line up until it really gets together. This is what is... It's a complex canon. I'll let you play one cycle, it's only 40 seconds. This is all bebop articulation, typical. The other trio. From this point on, we're into texture, complete texture. I want to show you the point where they do get together. So, and it takes 20 minutes to get there, so we're not going to do that now. But this is where you will see them getting together. If I can find that very, very fast. Letter S. So you can see them lining up gradually. It's a fast-forward system here, and they're really lining up gradually. So in pitch and in rhythm. So it's a vary speed over 2 octaves. So are we getting there? Yes? Yeah, almost, almost. Yeah, they're coming together. See that? And here we're approaching the moment when they come together. Let's play shortly before S. Etc. So that's the way it goes. I'm going to go very fast for the few minutes we have, but going back to that here, maybe that will help too. So where's the mouse? Yeah. Stay there, please. If you go back here, I want to tell you the story because we have not enough time. After that, I went into the generation of large forms. So trying to apply those principles of tweaking to generating form. And the forms which are paradoxicals. In that respect, I was very much in the spirit of the Oulipians, l'ouvroir de littérature potentielle, the Oulipians. Those are a group in the 60s and 70s of writers and semiologues and also sociologists who decided to value what I call the constraint. In order to create something, to become more agile, you cut yourself a leg and you try to dance on one. Or you try to limit yourself to just a few elements and to foster your creativity. So I was very much into that. So one very interesting novel of that time is by Italo Canevino called If by Winter Night, a Traveler. You might remember that story of the 80s. It's actually a library where a man and a woman go and they buy the new book of their favorite author. They come back home and they start to read that, and they realize that after chapter 1, the pages have been mismatched, something strange, it doesn't follow correctly, something is strange. So they come back to the library, both of them, and they tell the librarian, look, my book is not well printed, it's a print mistake or something, it doesn't function. And they look at the two books and they're different. And they look at all the other books and they're all different, of the same book or the same author. So they realize that they try, after many, many different chapters, where they try to figure out where does the novel go. They try to get all that together, all those different stories. And basically, it's a love story. Of course, they become enamored with one another. And the story is never really constructed completely. So this is what I did in a large piece called Le Cactus rieur et la demoiselle qui souffrait d'une soif insatiable. I actually worked with very, very, very small elements which sort of recombine themselves endlessly. There's a process which is extremely meditative, which it generates a very large structure, and then it generates 11 different stories together. So Le Cactus is actually a sort of synecdoche of Si par une nuit d'hiver un voyageur. So we won't really have time to go through that here. But what is most important in those pieces, Le Cactus, there's also two or maybe three different topics which are very, very clearly integrated in a syncretic way. The bebop is there all the time. It's Miles Davis and it Bill Evans all the time. Richard Strauss, to a certain extent, also Maurice Ravel. So, of course, there's no Strauss and there's no Ravel and there's no Miles Davis there at all. But through manipulation, I come close to the topics so I can gradually transform one into the other. So this whole piece is about that. So you can see, since we have to go very fast here, that the language itself, the meta-language, is starting to become more autonomous. In a piece like Du Fouet du Plaisir in the 90s then, there are auto-generating musical structures. So there are structures which generate themselves. That means that the way I tweak this very simple element, they project themselves over the large form. And it's very systematic. And it creates music which is very jazzy, very boogie-woogie, and very bop, again also here. Then, in a piece like Quaglia Sui, I'm going to play you just a little bit of that here, just because it's a bit too abstract now. But let's see Quaglia Sui, the first movement, if we can open that with the other program, because the other one crashed. Let's see if I can open that. Yeah. So I want to show you that very briefly. In that case, that's the maximum blue. That means the meta-language has become a topic by itself. It's a bit strange to talk in those terms, but it's as if the music, the meta-music had generated, started to take a life of its own. I've created an homunculus, and the homunculus is talking to me now. So it's a bit strange as and you'll see, the references are potentially there, but the music creates a completely coherent, functional pseudo-syntax. It doesn't need any references. It does carry accessoirement, but it's not the main point. Let's open the score. I want to play you a little bit of that before the end. Maybe I'll get a few minutes for the Anticostian saga. Let's see if I can find Quaglia Sui, the score. Yeah. So you'll see we're here in a very different type of mood. Okay, let's go for that a little bit here. So I want to point to you something here at bar 15, that little thing here. This is as far as I could go. This is base of complementary non-functional harmonies. So actually you hear the music vertically and horizontally at the same time harmonically. That means you can consider that as something which is almost tonal. Look at the piano part. But actually, if you look what the violin is doing, and the cello, so there are two layers, complementary harmonies. You can listen that way, your ear listened like almost coherent, and that way almost coherent. But there's always a vibration between the potential, fields there, which I cannot explain in detail now, but just play you a little bit of that here, so you see what I mean. Bar 16. Listen a bit further and you'll see how complex it becomes. I stop there. You see, this refers a lot, this is autoreferential. It refers to topics which we think we know which are distorted, but which still make sense and then layered. So it's a very strange way of listening. So this is why in my little path here, I really consider that a being autonomous. After that, and we're going to finish in a few minutes, I wrote a series of pieces which are much more looking backwards. That's a huge triple concerto, which really turns its back towards the past, and you can see very much Mahler. You can see very much Franz Liszt's shadows going there. It's the system enabled me to touch that topic so well that I almost fell. You know, you go on a tightrope, and at times you fall into the illusion. So this is where it frightened me very, very much. This is where I opened up again with the Anticostian cycle. The problematic, and I'm going to stop there, problematic for me was, since I didn't feel I belonged to any musical culture, I still don't feel that in any way, I was always eluding going from one meta-language to another, even if that meta-language seemed to have a life of its own at a certain point. But there was one thing which I didn't really think of. Basically, I was crisscrossing also physically between Europe and North America. I did that for 25 years, almost every month. And nowadays it's more calm. But I had looked, horizontally. But I had forgotten to look vertically. And right under my feet here, there's a fantastic, enormous, not only musical, but a culture, which is the First Nations music, which I've been studying since 15 years. And I'm not a specialist, but I've got many, many thousands of documents and books and recordings and stuff. I'm trying to make sense of that. I'm learning many things from that music. That should be the topic for another lecture at some point. But I just want to show you that what I've learned from this culture is something which has transformed completely the way I make music. One element is that music must be felt in your body. It sounds like a simplicity, but bodily music. It's really grounded in your movement. If you cannot feel it, it doesn't work. Secondly, music must have a function somehow, a sort of function. I'll show you a simple example also. of working with very simple elements with binary, ternary meter, triple or a duple meter. And if you listen carefully to many power music, which I've recorded, I'll show you that at some point, they seem to work, they don't make a clear difference between binary and ternary. It's very interesting. So you could say ping, ta, ti, and tam, pa, pam, pa, pam. Of course, that's a very clear thing. We tend to segment that. But you can go from one to the other very, very gradually. And I found a way. And I found a way to write it. And most of my music used that phenomenon there. So the simple way would say, I keep the beat straight, pa, pa, and I push my second eighth note gradually so it becomes a triplet. So we can do that. It's a 7, it's a 9, it's 11, it becomes, that would make pim, pam, pim, pam, pim, pam, pim, pam, pim, pam, pim, pam, pam. It's very lame. So that's not the way they do it. They're much more clever. What they do, they take the 7/8 note and they chop the value. So it becomes a triplet. So that means the tempo accelerates. And listen to the difference. Ping, tan, ting, tan, ting, tan, ting, tan, ting. I'm in a triplet now. My tempo has changed. It's completely organic. And I found a way to do those things. So a few elements there. Is there 1 minute to play one excerpt? Okay. Because that would leave you without much. So let's do rythme écho, dérivage anticostian. That's all I can say for the moment. But I'll play you a little bit of that. So you will hear many of those things. Harmonically also, the language, harmonic language, favors a sonic anaphone of percussive instruments or ratchets, grelots, and all sort of little tambours. So it's also transformed into the harmonic language. It's also done with microintervals, so it makes more sense. So let's get the score of that very simply here, if I can just do that a few minutes, and I'll leave you in that. That's for ensemble. And yeah, we can hear a little bit of that. Sorry, the other program crashed completely. I had all the excerpts there, but let's go. Bit more. Check the piano. Going to turn in 3. In 3 now. So we really oscillate. There's multiple speeds of triple and double. Whoa. Sorry, I lost it. Just with more. So I'm going to stop there for the moment, but that gives you just a taste of what it is. this music is not published nor very much disseminated, but on my page at McGill here, there's a link to all the scores and all recordings. So please help yourself, there's no problem with that. So that gives you a very, very short idea of how it evolved and why I'm working in those terms. You will have heard the difference between music from 40 years ago. There are 50, 60 pieces, which we didn't discuss. But there's a difference there. And the idea is that I still work with the same transformational system, but now the topic is a very different one. So it's now a syncretism of the First Nations and still have some advanced contrapuntal technique of, let's say, Europe. So this is where I find myself now. Thank you so much for your patience. Sorry for not being able to go in more details, and thank you for the invitation, Stephen. Question?
So we have a little bit of time for a few questions if people have any. There's a microphone. Please wait for the microphone because this is being webcast.
Yeah. Anyone else? Comment? Question? Cannot be that clear. John there, please.
Thank you, Denis. Really enjoyed the presentation. A dense presentation, but thank you.
Well, it's just too much stuff.
Just one question. You made many references. I kind of asked you this in the past, but maybe you could clarify it for me. You made many references today to both the earlier music that you've made and later music that you've made, wherein jazz makes I would say a key appearance. Not jazz as jazz, but as you say, jazz perhaps as topic, yeah. Jazz as illusion, jazz as an phrasing, analogy, and those who are sensitive to the and have knowledge of the jazz that you have made reference to can hear it. But what you don't say, and I would hope you would answer this question today, is what prompts you, or what prompted you to go there? Why jazz?
Yeah,
is jazz part of your upbringing? Is jazz part of your musical education? Is jazz part of your favorite listening music?
All that and none of that at the same time. Actually, if I could answer that, then I would know myself better than I will ever. The question was very simply, let's go back in the 80s. And then I was a lost person, literally, culturally, and I needed to grasp certain things which I felt a connection with. And this is purely subjective, absolutely purely subjective. What I had in my background was rock music. There's a lot of rock music in Chile. I mean, without rock music, it's with psychedelic music, very, very much. You could not compose a piece like that if you had not indulged into les paradis artificiels of the 80s, It's impossible to imagine music without that. So there's a good company with Baudelaire and Rimbaud and many other. But what I'm saying here is that I connected to pop music because I was a rock musician. That was my formation. I started to study classical music when I was 19, so I played rock guitar before. And then also I was fascinated by the jazz. And not that I'm a good jazz pianist, I can play a little bit, but it's not really my forte. But what I'm fascinated there is the phrasing. The idea that what is written is not what you play, the groove, the way you phrase, articulate. And I tried something very lively in all that. Jazz can be very strict, standard jazz can be extremely strict, but on a strict background, you can phrase in a very, very loose and free fashion, very expressively. So the jazz saxophone is a good example. So I was very much interested in that, and I tried to break from the normal notation. It led me into complex rhythms also, a bit too complex at times. But I wanted to create this free-floating type of articulation. This is what I took in jazz. I mean, it's not a real answer, but that's something which appeared to me as to make sense. As much as rock music did, and also my great, great fascination for the great symphonic poems of Strauss, and of course, Mahler's music. So it's a strange combination. I came to Mahler and Strauss much later. I learned that later. But those seem to be the things which were already at hand. I didn't know much more about folklore, Quebec folklore. I knew a little bit, but not very much. So I tried to imagine a syntax which would enable me to transform things and then freely associate. So when I compose jazzy music, it's not based on jazz. It's my tweaking system which allows me to border that topic, and then I can freely improvise on that topic. But I never have the risk of falling into jazz, except that I did that a little bit in the 90s, and I got frightened. So I really fell in my topic. It's difficult. You fell in your own soup, you know. You fall in your own soup. But I don't know if it's not a real answer, but it just happened to be a topic which I was interested in. So much more than, let's say, integral realism, which I understand and I respect for what it means. We could discuss the indexical value, the indexical component of serial music. That would be an interesting topic. We could spend the whole evening here. But I don't know if that's an answer. It's not an answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question about one of your slides that showed that recently X-rated and in-rated approaches coincide. Now there was the red blob and the blue blob superimposed. And I'm wondering, are the approaches fusing into one syncretic approach, or are they coexisting in the same piece?
That's a very good question. I wish I could answer that. I cannot really, because as I compose, I don't really think in those terms. All I do that is that in retrospect, trying to understand. But the reality is trying to find a balance between the X and the in. I think in the music I write now, I have a better balance. For my personal satisfaction and taste. It doesn't mean that you like or dislike the music. You know, that's a personal thing. You might like better what I did before. That's your prerogative. But for me personally, I think there's a better balance. And I feel much more in tune with what I believe. I believe in certain things, like we all do. And I think what I'm learning from the philosophy of the First Nations is exactly what the world needs. A sort of pantheistic vision of the world where the human has to take a place. And it's not, we're not governed the universe. We're just a very humble part of that. And that idea of being part of something which is greater than ourselves is really what I'm very much interested in, what I'm discovering. And the music reflects that. It's very clear what I write. It's quite complex because I invent the people. It's an invented culture, which I didn't talk to you of the saga. I'm writing a series of 7 operas, which span 500 years. So I'm inventing a new race, which will be a hybrid of First Nations from the 16th century with the first explorers, who came Jean Cartier, and the Beotux on Newfoundland. So I'm inventing that race. They have the language, they have their music, so I'm writing their music about 500 years. I don't know if I live old enough to be able to complete that. It doesn't matter. But what you heard was the overture of the 7 operas. This was John's idea, basically. He gave me that idea 10 years ago. Did sound like a overture. You were damn right. So, you know, it doesn't really answer your question, but I feel that there's a music language which refers to itself, that means which has a certain functionality within itself. But enough references the big question is that nowadays, politically, culturally, can we afford in a piece of concert music to quote an Indian song like we used to say First Nation song? Not really. And First Nation don't really like that either, appropriation. You cannot really do that. It would be too blunt. So what I'm trying to do with a greater respect to get inspired by that, and it's not quoting them. So there's the fine line again. This is where there's extrinsic there, but it becomes intrinsic because it becomes a certain autonomous language. You can the models, I showed you a couple organ dances of Brahms, the mazurka of Chopin. Yes, of course, you can feel the spirit of the mazurek in Chopin, but it's no longer that. That's something else different. Yes, you can feel Schumann in Ligeti, and you can feel Bellevent, but it's something else, you see? So that's what I call the balance, where you just quote. I never actually did quote anything, but I inadvertently almost quoted certain things at times, and then I had to be careful. But I don't know if this answers the question, but it's a matter of balance, which I'm trying to find, where I feel in harmony with myself doing that. I'm still awaiting the first concert in presence of members of First Nations. Let's see their reaction. I'm scared to death. I'm scared to death. I'm not sure they're going to like it. I don't know. I don't know. But it's not meant to please them, nor is it meant to please you or you or you. It's meant to please me, to communicate something which I believe in myself. So I hope that I'm not paying any disrespect to this culture, because I'm very much in deep respect for it. I don't know if that answers the question, but the red and the blue blobs could come to a better balance than 30, 40 years ago.
I think we have to stop there. Thank you very much, Denys.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
And please come to the next Research Alive, which will be on February 28th with Lisa Barg and the Jazz Orchestra 1. This will be sort of like a pre-concert talk. So she'll be talking about some of the research she's done on gender and things like that involved in jazz music, but then you can come back and hear the Jazz Orchestra play the full concert afterwards. Thank you.
Merci pour l'invitation.